What comes to mind when you think of grasslands and plains in Dungeons and Dragons? Is it just a boring, flat area? I think that that is a pretty great oversimplification of that type of terrain. These vast open spaces are actually really ripe for adventure and providing that exploration experience to your party. Hi, welcome back aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall. Welcome to a new series where we are going to explore the different terrain types for your hex crawls, point crawls, and other sandbox campaigns. We're going to break down the unique themes, the features, and kinds of monsters that might call these terrains home. This is one series that I've been wanting to do for a while. The dungeon design series that we did earlier in the year is kind of the predecessor to this, and I think this is a really nice follow-up to that. If you haven't checked out the dungeon design series, check the channel for the playlist on that one, or you can find one of the videos up here. Thematic terrain series is going to be looking at these kind of biomes that represent different hexes and how we might present those in our games, because those are also interesting, albeit larger areas where the players find adventure in. So for our first installment, we are going to head to the rolling hills and endless fields of the plains and the grasslands. So let's go ahead and dive into it. I think to start our discussion on these different types of terrains, we need to take a look at how they are presented contextually in literature and throughout human culture. Nature and the different biomes on planet Earth are ripe with symbolism and meaning that humans have prescribed to it. And I think if you want to design some fun areas for your sandbox game, you might as well lean into those different themes and borrow from them. Looking at grasslands and plains, they really have four central themes that came up time and again as I was researching for this video. The first is the idea of the expanse, freedom, and the horizon. Plains are often depicted as boundless, flat, unbroken landscapes that really kind of emphasize the idea of the sky and the horizon. In literature, this is often linked to freedom, openness, and potential, but also the idea of vulnerability. There's no trees or mountains to seek shelter under. It's just the open expanse. In nomadic traditions, grasslands are a stage for mobility and conquest. Think about nomadic tribes that are able to rapidly move across these plains because there isn't a lot of obstacles in their way that allows for that mobility and the ability to move quickly. And throughout literature, plains are often depicted as scenes of great battles. It's where armies meet and try to conquer one another. In the second theme, we have this idea of opposing symbols, and that's the idea of the pastoral ideal and the harsh frontier. Grasslands provide grazing. They're kind of this archetypical pastoral landscape in literature. From Virgil's eclogues to English Romantic poetry, the meadows and plains kind of stand for peace, simplicity, and harmony with nature. Now contrast the idyllic pastoral grasslands, and we see in other Western literature the idea of frontier grasslands that can be harsh and demanding. In the case of a game like Dungeons and Dragons, which is mostly about conflict, I think that frontier grasslands probably are the one that are a little bit more readily deployable in our game. And if you read different OSR bloggers, many of them argue that D&D is really a Western frontier style game under the mask and guise of medieval fantasy. Now, of course, while the harsh frontier is a little bit more immediately deployable in our games, that doesn't mean we can't use the pastoral landscape either. You probably just need to give it a little bit more thought on what might make sense and why that would be an interesting place for the party to go and adventure at. Perhaps it's not so idyllic after all, or maybe there's something that lies just underneath the surface that's a little bit more sinister or a little bit more nefarious. Third, we have this idea of vastness and existential confrontation. Because plains lack cover, they really create this sense of exposure, both physically to weather and enemies, but also metaphysically to fate and the cosmos or the sky above. Plains can really symbolize that idea of loneliness and isolation, especially when the flatness stretches to the horizon with no end in sight. In a sandbox where we are really kind of leaning into the exploration aspect of the game, I think this is a very valuable tool. The isolation can really kind of play into the sense of where the party's at and what they're trying to achieve in their quest, and really kind of being alone in that adventure. Lastly is the theme of liminal and transitional space. Planes often act as these thresholds in stories, literature, and just kind of the natural world. The space between wilderness, your forests and mountains, and civilization is often plains, whether it's farmlands or kind of these natural grasslands where cities would locate themselves. In epic storytelling, as we've kind of already mentioned, they are often presented as battlefields, an open area where armies clash. Think of the Iliad's Scamander Plain or any other countless medieval sagas where battles take place. They're probably happening in some sort of field or grassland. Plains are really considered kind of this blank canvas of landscapes. They're symbolic both of that idea of emptiness, but also possibility, both what's beyond and what could be right here. So when we are designing our settings, I think there's a few different ways we can really kind of break these themes down that are a little bit more digestible and readily usable within our games. The first is planes as freedom. This is really an idea where, it's good for characters who are seeking new beginnings, exploration, or kind of that frontier ethos. When you're designing your game, and if you decide to put a plane into it, you could decide to build NPCs that really are maybe looking for those new beginnings or kind of see the world with an idea of possibilities ahead of them. Next is the idea of planes as exposure. This is really a way for you as a game master to kind of heighten the tension in your game. Planes don't offer many places to hide. Think about storms that are visible from afar or enemies that are approaching across open land. That really kind of ratchets up the tension and the situation for the party as they might find themselves in it. Next is that idea of planes as pastoral. So we talked a little bit about how this can be a little bit more challenging to implement, but I think one way we can do it is to really kind of contrast the industrialization or city life or possibly corruption. You can kind of present this utopian versus dystopian ideal. Maybe you have a city or village located in these plains that is presenting a little bit more of that idyllic lifestyle that contrasts against maybe the corrupt city that's not terribly too far away from it. And then lastly, we have the idea of planes as existential. We can really use this to kind of evoke the idea of feelings of smallness or insignificance in a vast world. This can really play up maybe the players realizing that they don't know a lot about the greater mysteries that are going on around them, or just give that sense of the world is quite big and there's a lot out there for them to explore and check out. Next, I wanted to highlight some of the groups or categories of monsters inhabitants that I think would work well in grasslands and plains. There are a lot of different monsters that could be thematically appropriate, but I think monsters of grasslands are really shaped kind of by their environment, like all monsters should be, as you're selecting them in the different terrains you're building in your sandbox. In this case, they are probably either masters of open space or perhaps are able to avoid that entirely. So the first category I want to talk about is kind of the predators of land and sky. Now, these are going to be your creatures that are able to use these wide open spaces to hunt effectively. Some good examples of this would be griffins, wyverns, manticores. These are hunters that can spot prey prey from a great distance. Because the plains are so exposed, they have that kind of aerial vantage point that really gives them that big advantage to spot things from a long ways away and are able to coordinate their attacks based off of having that knowledge before maybe they themselves are spotted. The second group is kind of these hunters of the herd. These are really creatures that live in nomadic or maybe pack based groups. They're creatures that have some advantage in mobility being one of their key strengths. They're able to move quickly, they're able to attack effectively, they can use this open space to their advantage. I think things like maybe Knoll warbands or nomadic centaur tribes, or possibly even orcs or other humanoids that are able to organize and move quickly would work really well in this kind of idea. You also have creatures that also hunt in packs or prides. So, giant cats, maybe lions or cheetahs, things like that, that could really move at a quick distance and operate in these groups. And then also don't forget that, if these are hunters of the herd, then you probably have herd animals on your plains as well. In North America, we have the bison. In Africa, you have elephants and gazelle, lots of different animals that you could set up as pack animals that kind of add some flavor to your environment. Lastly, we have the idea of the burrowers. These are really creatures that are going to live beneath the surface, kind of avoiding that direct sun, hiding in their lairs, avoiding those predators that roam above ground. And in their own right, they could actually be predators themselves, using that advantage they have being underground and attacking victims from below. Good examples of this would be onkegs, boulettes, and even purple worms. The presence of these burrowing creatures you could, telegraph by either indicating them through, sinkholes, tunnels, or other areas of disturbed dirt. I also think these creatures are really great because they present some opportunity for natural dungeons in the grassland environment. These are creatures that build their lairs underground. That's a dungeon. Maybe they have caught some unsuspecting victims in the past. They've taken to their lair, and there's some treasure that remains behind with their remains. So, good opportunities for the players to have these kind of small lair adventures or points of interest. So I think it's worthwhile to mention a few ideas on unique features and aspects that could capture and utilize grassland environments and really kind of maximize their potential. First, I think it's worth mentioning landmarks and the lack thereof. In expansive grasslands, there might not be a lot of distinguishing features. That makes navigation a lot more challenging if there's nothing on the horizon to anchor the party's travel towards. However, when they do find a landmark, it's going to be pretty obvious and stand out. And I think that's a really good opportunity to build up something fantastical or interesting as a point of interest for them to check out within that hex. Next, it's worth mentioning weather on grassland environments. First is wind. If you've ever been to the plains, they can have some serious wind, and that can cause some real issues for the party or other inhabitants on the plain. First, missile attacks are going to be impaired, if not impossible. Good luck trying to shoot your bow in 40-mile-an-hour winds. Sound can also really be distorted or muted. That can make it challenging to hear creatures coming up on them, maybe allowing for a greater surprise chance. And then lastly, you're going to have certain weather events that can happen on the plains. Tornadoes, dust storms, those can cause some serious problems. They can cause some serious damage if you get caught in them. Next, you have the idea of sun exposure. Depending on your climate, grasslands can be quite sunny, paired with a lack of shade from trees. That can become a real problem. If you're tracking water usage and or maybe you have some sort of exhaustion system in your game like 5e did, you could think about using that if you want, or upping sort of the consumption of water in that case. You could also really play up the idea of seasonal dynamics, change how the terrain, the grasslands present themselves to the party at different times of the year. In dry months, the plains could be really dusty, which gives way to maybe more of a verdant, monster-filled landscape in a wetter season. Perhaps your monsters are seasonally migrating when those different times of year occur. Lastly, I think it's worth giving some thought to how grasslands visibility plays into the dynamics of random encounters. On the one hand, you generally have pretty good visibility on the plains. So that means evasion would be difficult, if not impossible, if one party decided to retreat or avoid the encounter altogether. It would really come down to speed and or if the other party wanted to pursue. But then if your grasslands are tall enough or you decide to incorporate some rolling hills into your grasslands, those do present some opportunities for ambushes. Monsters or possibly entire encampments could be hidden from sight, or the party could decide to use the grasslands to their advantage and ambush someone who's approaching. This really changes the dynamics of a seemingly empty hex into one that can actually be filled with a lot of danger and risk and opportunity. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on how grasslands and plains are represented symbolically in the media sources we consume and throughout human culture. I think there are a lot of great themes that we can pull from to make our grasslands and plains go from kind of that boring, wide open expanse to something that can really represent a real challenge for the party. Throughout the coming weeks, I'll be covering more of these terrains in different videos mixed with other content to keep it from getting a little bit too repetitive. But let me know in the comments how you like to use these grasslands and plains in your sandbox games. Do you think I missed anything that I should cover in these types of videos going forward? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Consider checking out Enchanted Nimbus, my monthly newsletter. Thanks for hopping aboard the Earthmote. I'll see you in the next one.